I was recently asked one of my favourite questions, which is what are the predictions for the Australian property market in 2025? Now, for the last 10 years, I've been buying an incredible report called the SQM Boom and Bust Report. Now, this report's less than $100 and is filled with absolute gold. Now, what I love about this report is it looks at each of Australia's capital cities and not just one scenario, but a number of scenarios over the course of the year based on things like monetary policy, inflation, population growth, and interest rates. Now, based on these different scenarios, Perth on the worst side is expected to do about 7%, and on the best side of their scenarios, about 20% in 2025. Brisbane is also expected to do extremely well, going somewhere between 4 and 16%, depending on how things work out in the economy this year. There's a monster range in Melbourne, anywhere between -9%, depending on where interest rates go, to +6%, which is very much in line with what CoreLogic are saying for Melbourne, saying that Melbourne should do around about 5.3 to 6% this year. Now, Sydney was the outlier this year, with anywhere between -10% to +7%, depending on how the economy performs. Now, obviously, I always take this data from people like SQM or CoreLogic or any of the big data providers in Australia with a grain of salt, because we're all humans and we can never possibly predict the future perfectly. But after buying this report for a number of years, it's been relatively accurate and an exciting guide for at least which capital cities, which are definitely Perth and Brisbane, look the best for 2025. I was catching up with a really good friend of mine over the Chrissy break, where he stayed at my house with his kids for a couple of days, and we were sitting down one night having a beer talking about his plans for the new year, and he asked, if it was my money, where would I be looking to buy in 2025? Now, I said to him, after sitting down and recently analysing Australia's 19 largest markets and over 4,222 suburbs, for me personally, it's definitely Brisbane and Melbourne. Now, what I like about Brisbane on one hand is the Olympic Games are coming up, and in that period between 1997 and 2003 in Sydney, house prices went up 97%. On the flip side, what I love about Melbourne right now is it's super affordable. In fact, according to an Australian Financial Review article that just came out, the gap between house prices in Sydney and Melbourne is now a 60% difference, which is the largest gap we've seen in Australia in over 30 years. Now, when I was looking at the Melbourne market in particular, there are incredible suburbs between 12 and 30 k's from the city where you can get really high quality houses and townhouses in that 400 to 600k range, which is phenomenal. I think while Brisbane's on fire at the moment and will continue to do well leading up to the games, Melbourne might just be that sleeper, which might not do anything meaningful for a few years, but has incredible potential over the next 10. I got asked a great question on YouTube this week, which is what is my favorite personal property investment strategy? After trying out a whole bunch of different strategies over the last 15 years, I've come back to a simple strategy that for me has worked time and time again. Now, that strategy is a house and a granny flat. Now, what I love about this strategy is I get the benefit of long-term capital growth, I get phenomenal cash flow because I've got 2 incomes instead of 1, and I get phenomenal tax benefits as well with the Australian depreciation benefits available to investors right now. Now, what I also love about this strategy is it massively reduces my risk as an investor, because if one tenant leaves for a period of time, I've still got some income coming in the background from the second property. On top of this, as an investor, my goal has always been a small passive income for my family for life. And because of the 2 incomes, it enables me to pay off debt faster, which results in me owning that property sooner in the future and having those choices and that freedom down the line. Now, if you're anything like me, you probably don't love debt, which is why I wanted to share 5 really simple ideas for how you can pay off your debt on your own home or investment property faster. Now, the first idea is just being disciplined around principal and interest. I know it's the super boring strategy, but effectively, if you do that over a 30-year period, you'll have $0 of debt and own your own property completely outright. Now, the second idea is to pay a little bit extra off your home or your investment property each week. Now, you can play with the calculators online, but even chucking in $100 or $200 a week can take a 30-year loan down to 22, even 17 years, depending on how much you're kicking in each week. Third idea is for investment properties. So basically, when you buy the property, the cash flow is the worst it's ever going to be. But over time, the rent goes up and the debt comes down, and you're left with surplus rent or income every single week. Now, if you're disciplined with that money over time, then you can take that extra $100 or $200 a week that the property sprays off over time and use that to massively wipe off the debt on your property faster. The fourth idea is also for investors, and that is if you've built a brand new place or done a major renovation to your property, then after speaking with your accountant, you might be entitled to some tax benefits. Now, instead of like most Aussies taking that tax benefit every year of 5, 10, 20,000 bucks and going and spraying it on a new jet ski or whatever, you can just take that money and whack it straight off the debt on your property, which massively helps you get to debt free on your property sooner. Now, the fifth and final idea is my personal favorite, and I've used this strategy a lot, and that is a partner property. Now, with this idea, we simply go out there and we've got our own home or our investment, and we buy one more property which sits alongside that. Now, what we might do, let's say we buy $1 million house today that goes up in value by 5% per year for the next 15 years. In 15 years, that property is worth $2 million. Now, in 15 years' time, we sell that property for $2 million. We pay a whole bunch of tax plus the bank's money back, but we're still left with a huge chunk of cash, and we take that money and wipe it straight off our own home or our investment properties to get there faster. Now, if you use all of these ideas in combination, instead of the standard 30 to 40 years that most people take to pay off their own homes or their investments, you might be able to do it in 10, 15, or 20. Now, I got asked the great question this week on Instagram from an investor called Tim in South Australia, and he said, Ben, are there any property investment books that you would recommend? Now, I recently read this one over the Christmas break, which is by Akhil Patel, and it's called The Secret Wealth Advantage. Now, this book looks at hundreds of years worth of American and European history and looks at the economy's long-term cycles. Now, effectively, this long-term cycle looks like this. We have an incredible period up, and then we get a bit of a correction in the middle, like COVID, and then we get another incredible period up, which we're in at the moment, and then we get another crash like the GFC or the Great Depression. Now, one thing I loved is that so many business books or property books or stock trading books is just so grey and so in the middle, and they're not prescriptive, where this book gives you literally a roadmap on a year-on-year basis over the long-term 18.6-year real estate cycle on exactly when to go hard, what to buy at what times in the cycle, and when to pull back so that you don't burn yourself or your family. I highly, highly, highly recommend this book, which you can get on Amazon or Booktopia for about 30 to 40 bucks at the moment. It will absolutely change your life for the future and is well worth putting on your book list for 2025. I was sitting in the car with my daughter a few days ago, and she asked when and where did I buy my first property, which I was pretty stoked because she's only 12 at the moment and she's starting to think about this stuff, probably because of me a little bit more. Now, I said to her that I bought my first property with a couple of friends in Sydney. It was a 2-bedroom unit in a suburb on the south side of the city called Miranda when I was 24. Now, I bought this property in 2011 and I'd been at uni during the last GFC, so I didn't even know how bad things were at that time, but I just sort of went out there and bought that property. Now, I had no foundation, no knowledge, no team, no skills at all at that particular time, and I was absolutely freaking out. So I spent about 6 months researching everything that I possibly could, and I remember it accumulated in me having about a 70 to 80 page document, maybe even 90 page document, which I sent to the only person that I knew in my life that had bought investment property before. Now, when I sent him the document, I asked him one question in the email, which is, do you think this is a good investment? I'll never ever forget his response where he gave me a call and he said, Ben, I have no idea if this is a good investment property, but what I know is if you keep doing this amount of analysis, one day you'll figure this out. What I learned from that experience is the first property isn't always going to be perfect, but as long as it's a stepping stone in the right direction, I've never felt more proud or more excited about a property that I bought in my entire life. I think sometimes when we're starting out as investors, it can be very, very much looking up, all hustle, all grind, all hard work. And that's the time when we've got information overload, we're feeling completely fearful and we're not sure what's really going on or if it's all going to work out. But I do want to say to you, as someone who's 15 years down the line, that there is light at the end of the tunnel and it will all work out for you. Property investing has completely changed my life and my family's lives for the better. Not only has it allowed me to choose work that I love, but it's allowed me to spend way more time with my family, work 4 days per week, take huge chunks of the year off with my family during the school holidays, take 6 months off with my family in a caravan traveling around Australia, and go on all sorts of beautiful trips that I couldn't even have imagined of growing up. But even more important than that, it's given me peace and financial security for my future so that in retirement, I'm not going to have to stress out about where my next dollar is going to come from. I get asked this question all the time, almost every single week on our YouTube, Facebook, or Instagram pages, and that is, should I be looking at property or stocks? Now, while I'm not an accountant or a financial advisor, I am a numbers guy, and when I think about it from my position and my family, I look at it this way. Now, let's say you've got $100,000 and you go out there and you look at stocks first. Now, based on the history, we know that stocks in Australia or America have done about 6 to 9% per annum over the last 50 years. Now, let's say on that 100K, you have a phenomenal year in 2025 and the market goes up 9%. That means you've made $9,000 in year one. Now, that's a phenomenal return and I'd be absolutely stoked to achieve that. But if I compare that with property, which is what I focus on personally as an investor, then if we take that same 100K and we go out there and we use leverage with the bank and buy a $500,000 property. Now, when looking back at the history, Australian property has also done extremely well. In fact, according to Simon Presley, it's done about 8.2% per annum for the last 50 years. But let's be super conservative and say in 2025, it only goes up 5%. Now, 5% return on your $500,000 is a $25,000 gain. But on that original 100K that you put in, you've made $25,000. Now, if I look at stocks in year one versus property on the same money, in one scenario, I've made $9,000. On the other, I've made $25,000. And this difference compounds over time, which is why property was the foundation of my investment strategy and what I love for young investors out there in Australia today. Now, I was reading some phenomenal articles over the Chrissy break, and one of them I came across was by Simon Presley looking at how Australian real estate has performed over the last 50 years. Now, the title of the article is what sucked me in, which was something like Australian real estate, one of the top performing assets in the world in the last 50 years. And what Simon went and did is looked at how Australian property prices have gone up over that time. What he found was phenomenal, that the average property in Australia has gone up by 8.2% per annum in the last 50 years. Now, I also recently read a book by John Lindeman called Mastering the Australian Housing Market, and he actually looked at 100 years worth of property prices, and he found that they'd gone up on average in Australia's major regional and metro markets by 11% per annum, which is absolutely phenomenal. Now, why I think this is important for you and I is that although it's had a great history of performance, let's just say it doesn't do as well in the future. Now, if you've got a $500,000 property today and it goes up by just 5% per annum over the next 15 years, your 500K property is now worth $1 million. And that is the power of Australian real estate. I got asked a great question by Sam this week, which was, what is the easiest way to pay off my own home in the next 15 years? Now, I really wish I could have been sitting down with myself 15 years ago because I would have saved myself so much pain. But let's say you've got your own home worth $1 million now, and you and your partner are earning a good combined income. Now, what I would personally do is what I call a partner property strategy. So let's say on your $1 million home, you've got $700,000 of debt that you've got to get rid of in the next 15 years. I would personally simply go out there and buy another $700,000 property. And if it goes up by 5% a year for the next 15 years, then that property is worth 1.4 mil. Now, when you sell that property, obviously you've got to pay a lot of tax and you've got to pay the bank back. But after all of that, you should be left with a great chunk of change. Now, over the 15 years, you'll be slowly chipping away at principal and maybe a little bit extra on your own home. Now, the combination of those two things, plus this chunk that you make from your partner property, should completely wipe your debt if you're disciplined and consistent in the next 15 years. G'day guys, my name's Ben and I'm the director here at Pumped on Property, and I just want to say a massive thank you for watching our content today. Now, if you're thinking about buying an investment property in the next 3 to 12 months, then the team and I would love to offer you a one-on-one strategy session. In that session, we can talk about exactly where you are right now, where you'd like to be longer term, and we can deeply educate you on the Australian market. And then you can take that information and go and absolutely smash it on your own, or potentially become one of the small number of clients that we work with each week. To book your session, all you have to do is go to www.pumpedonproperty.com and click that book your free strategy session button. But either way, we wish you all the best on your journey as an investor to financial freedom.